Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, last time I mentioned the fact that we didn't have the collar ties on, which is the reason we couldn't take the braces out yet. So here's a concept to think about. You know, half of what you need to know about loads and engineering when it comes into home construction, you learned as a child when you made a card house, if you ever made a house with playing cards. And when you're thinking about a roof, a traditional roof, which is just a raftered roof, think about when you set those two cards together and tried to make a roof. And what did they want to do? They wanted to go like this. Basically, the bottom sides wanted to slip out, and if you put any pressure down, which obviously things like snow loads and things, and put weight on the roof, the actual framing members put weight on a roof, it's always trying to make it expand, right? It's always trying to push the sides out. So once you're attached to the sidewalls, that roof's trying to do this, okay? And what we do to counteract that is we have a member go across horizontally, which is also called the ceiling rafter normally, and that's called also called collar tie. And you know, the reason it says that, it's tying those two things together, so once you put that board across the bottom, it can't push out. And when that's poorly done, what will happen is we've got 20 feet long walls, and if we didn't have these collar ties, you see they're up now. On this one, we did every other one because we're not doing a finished ceiling. You know, this is just a shed. But if we didn't have those collar ties, what eventually would happen is the ends can't push out, right? Because we have these walls, right, front and the back. But in the middle, we don't have end walls. And it'll slowly start to push those out, and they'll bow a little bit. A great way to tell when it's been poorly done in a house, if you've ever looked at a house and it looks like it's just kind of a sway back on a horse in the middle of the roof, that's probably because it wasn't supported right. So collar ties are up, they're 2x6, they're every other one. Last thing I'll tell you about collar ties is for them to be effective, they have to be in the first third of the joist span. So in other words, from that top plate, we can only go up a third or they're not effective. So that's what we did. We actually went up a third. We put ours up a little higher because our 7-foot walls, we wanted a little bit of clearance. That's actually at 8 feet, which is normal ceiling height. So I'm going to show you a few more things that you need to think about, but I'm going to grab the camera. So as you can see down here on this end, on the gable end is what we call that, you know, the traditional house looking thing. We framed that up really nicely. We framed it up, you know, on center with studs. The studs are in normal direction. They're not flat. Flat studs and gable ends never work out well because they bow in that direction. So when you see that, that's a problem. And I'll show you outside what the actual soffit should look like on a gable end. Same thing. Last time, remember, we just had this beam floating there. Now that beam's all supported in there to make sure it's not going anywhere. And we put the little bit of framing load that's on that wall connected to that beam. So took our time, did a nice job. Too many times I find these old gable ends where people just patched lumber in there and put, in the meantime, later it's a problem. So something to think about. We already talked about the walls. We have what's called the hurricane clips on, and or hurricane brackets, whichever you want to call it. I've always used these because I never thought it was a particularly great attachment, just having the rafters toe-nailed on, and I thought this was a better attachment. They're pretty much code in all areas anymore with the wind loads. So now, if you saw my thing on fasteners, notice there's 5 holes on the top and 5 holes on the top. There's 5 nails in the top, 5 nails in the bottom, okay? It could either, the failure points on a bracket, say we had a hurricane come in here, would be shearing those nails off in that shear plane. So it would, right now with this, we're as good as shearing 5 of those nails because you could either shear the top or the bottom. A lot of people skip this and they only put a couple nails in there. So imagine I only put 2 of the nails in there and left 3 of the nails without, or holes without nails in it. You have derated the strength of that bracket 60%. It's only at 40% of its strength because all it has to do is shear 2 nails now. The other thing is, remember I told you got to use the right nails? You can't use, these are galvanized nails made specifically for brackets by Simpson or whoever's bracket. There's other brands. But the bottom line is they're thicker, so they're harder to shear, and they're also galvanized. If you use a nail that's not galvanized, eventually it's going to rust. And as it rusts, it's losing its strength and it will shear easier. So let's run outside for a second. So these are, if you look up, this is the soffits on the eaves, right? Eaves, gable ends, whatever you want to call it, different names for it. What we've done is we put 2x6 outlooks there that we have screwed in. And if you remember the thing about what's happening on these, if we nail those from the back, the forces are actually trying to pull away as that load there and screws the wrong fasteners. So these are all screwed. They're screwed from the back. They're screwed at an angle so that we overcome that. They're also 2x6s. The other thing I see a lot of time is people will scab little 2x4s in there for the outlook. And inevitably, when you're, if you've ever had involved in working on a house, an existing house, been there 30 years, inevitably you find out the soffits have sagged. So I try to build mine. You know, these are 16 on center. You'll see some soffits where they put like 2 of those in there, and it's not good, right? So that's something you want to do. The other thing, if you look at the way we did the OSB, large sheets. OSB is a structural component. People need to understand that. It is your #1 defense against wind and shear, okay? So patching in little tiny pieces of OSB or whatever sheathing you're using is weakening your house. So we want to use large pieces that span big planes. See that whole triangle above the garage, or the garage door is one piece. There's 2 big pieces on the side, and that is proper shear load and wind loading. Don't go cheesy on the OSB. It's not a good, gable end isn't, oh, here's a good place to use up all these little scraps. Last thing I'll show you is look at down this soffit line. You see that board is perfectly straight. I gave you a series of pictures of how to do this. This is why we did not trim the tails ahead of time. So we snapped the line, we plumbed them, and we went back and cut each one of the tails to that line so that when we put the fascia board on, it's perfectly straight. If we would have trimmed them ahead of time, I guarantee this board would have done this, and it would have been wavy and it would have looked awful, which these are all things that I think that matter. So it's all about doing things the right way. The last thing I'll mention here is the roof sheathing. I use 1/2-inch 4-ply plywood, or you consider using 5/8 if you're going 24-inch on center. This is 16-inch on center. It does not have ply clips in it because if you're spanning 24-inch you need ply clips. This doesn't need it. It's already got the felt on it. I never like to get my plywood wet. It ruins plywood. I don't care if it says it's exterior rated with CDX. I never let it happen. So it's in the stack. I've got it covered. When I get it on and I get it installed, regardless how long my day is, I finish my day with putting the felt on, because plywood that's been rained on is not good. It delaminates and it'll ruin a roof eventually. So anyways, there's some more framing tips, things you need to know, but we're done. This shed's, the braces are gone, and it's self-sufficient.